All right, so I had this conversation with a client just the other day. So I thought I discussed it since I haven't talked about it much before, and that is the taxpayer advocate service. All right, um, the tax advocacy is about taxpayers with tax issues if they're not able to resolve those issues directly with the IRS. The first thing I want to get out of the way is that tax advocacy service is still the IRS. When you're talking with the taxpayer advocate, you're still dealing with an IRS employee, and so you never ever want to divulge any details that you're not sure about. You definitely don't want to give too much information. Always seek out private counsel in these situations because whatever information you give that tax advocate can and will be used against you. Those calls are recorded, and again, they are IRS employees, so they're going to be concerned that if you don't report it, then their job will be on the line. So they will definitely report anything that you tell to them, and so you want to be very careful about what you say and how you say it. I do want to talk about, however, when it is necessary to reach out to tax advocacy and how to do so. In my many years of practice, I have definitely gone to the tax advocacy more than a few times, and typically it's because timelines are not being met when dealing with the IRS. Typically, the IRS will tell you, oh, this will be resolved in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, and it's not. And so whenever those timelines are not met, that's when I reached out to tax advocacy. So let's go through a little bit about who they are, what they are. All these links that you see here, I'll throw them in the description, of course. Um, this just talks about, how the taxpayer advocacy accepts cases and why they accept cases. All right. So you'll see here a TAO, taxpayer assistance order. That's what the taxpayer advocacy issues once they accept your case. All right. So first things first, I talk about here and all through this document is hardship, because that is the typical route that a lot of taxpayers will take when contacting taxpayer advocacy. And I'm here to tell you right now, do not do that. There are a couple reasons. Number one, they are so inundated with hardship cases that many times they don't take them because they know that these hardship cases are basically BS, right? You get a letter in the mail saying that you owe $1,000, and the first thing you want to do is run to taxpayer advocacy and say, hey, I got a letter saying I owe $1,000. I want to claim this under hardship. And they're just like, have you even tried to resolve this with the IRS, right? And so they kind of expect that. And so a lot of times they'll simply just deny your case without going much further. The other reason why you don't want to do hardship is because when you do hardship, then it means that the taxpayer advocate, then has to substantiate your hardship in some way or another. Now, here in black and white, it does say that taxpayers do not need to validate their hardship, but again, the taxpayer advocate themselves has to document the hardship in the course of developing the case and determining what relief is appropriate. Okay, and a lot of times that relief they're talking about is either going to be a payment plan or it's going to be possibly some sort of offset. Okay, but again, you don't want to start talking to an IRS agent about some sort of relief, giving them financial information without even understanding where your case is or what's going on with it. Okay, so again, definitely for sure seek out private counsel to discuss this stuff. I noticed too before I started this video that I haven't done a video on the offset, and at least it's been a while anyway, so I'll definitely want to refresh that. So anyway, let's talk about what the case criteria are. Okay, so number one, of course, is going to be economic burden. All right, economic harm is the taxpayer is experiencing economic harm or is about to suffer economic harm, and again, you'll have to explain to them what the economic harm is. You just can't say, you know, I owe money and I can't pay it, right? That's not going to work. And then, like I said, if you say that, then they're going to want to know, okay, well, how much money do you make? What are your expenses? You don't want to go into that stuff, right? Taxpayers facing an immediate threat of adverse action. Again, this will be something like you get a letter and the IRS is saying they're going to dock your pay, they're going to repossess your house or something like that. Again, unless you have a case already working and the IRS has not met deadlines, will you ever go this route? But again, that won't necessarily be economic burden. All right. Next one, taxpayer will incur significant cost if relief is not granted, including fees for professional representation. This one I can say is possible, but again, it's going to be really hard to prove. Something like this will typically come from your representative, right? Not from you, because how if relief isn't granted, you're going to incur financial representation. I mean, professional representation doesn't make a lot of sense. So typically, again, this is something that will come from your representative that you already have. All right, number 4, taxpayer will suffer irreparable injury or long-term adverse impact if relief is not granted. Again, this comes inside of economic burden. This is arguable when you're dealing with a case where someone is trying to close on a property and some tax situation is holding it up. Maybe there is some estate issue and you will lose administrator rights to the estate if this tax issue isn't. So again, there are definitely some good reasons to use economic burden, but typically that's not where you want to go. All right, systemic burden. This is where you will traction, okay? And the reason why is because in my experience, most taxpayer advocates who take their job seriously, right, understand that the IRS has crazy delays and they are notorious for not following through on deadlines. And so they will more likely take your case on because this is something that they can very easily research, right? If you say, hey, the IRS told me they'll get back to me in 30 days, they haven't gotten back to me, they can very easily go in and look at the case and say, oh yeah, no one's touched this for the last 30 days or 60 days. They haven't issued any new letters or anything like that. Let me take this case, right? And they will very easily issue that tax advocacy order, TAO. Anyway, taxpayer has experienced a delay of more than 30 days to resolve a tax account problem, okay? And again, don't take this stuff verbatim, okay? Because again, if the IRS says, hey, give us 30 days, or hey, give us 60 days, or hey, give us 90 days, then you have to respect their timeline. It's only if they haven't met their timeline, then you have a case with tax advocacy. And that's another thing that I always stress when you are communicating with the IRS. Always, always, always get a name, get a badge number, and you always ask for a timeline. I don't care what it's about, what it's for. Always ask those 3 things. Make sure you keep good notes of those things so that you can go back and say, hey, Mr. Smith, badge number blah, 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 told me that I'm going to have this resolved, or at least I'm going to hear something back by January 17th. It's January 17th. I still haven't heard anything. Boom. Taxpayer advocate will issue that case right away. A system or procedure has either failed to operate as intended or failed to resolve the taxpayer problem or dispute within the IRS. Again, this just goes back to missing deadlines. Sometimes this can fall under the category of I was told to fax in something, I faxed it in, but for some reason they're telling me they still don't have my information. Or I was told to mail something, I mailed it, and for whatever reason they still don't have it, right? And speaking of mail too, when you mail something to the IRS, you always want to make sure to mail it certified, okay? The USPS has a green sticker that attaches to your letter that is certified return receipt. And what happens is when the IRS receives your documentation, they see that postcard, They will stamp it with the date and the signature of the employee who received it in the mailroom, okay? And then they will mail that postcard back to you. And that is your only proof that you have sent anything to the IRS. A simple receipt doesn't work. A picture of what you sent doesn't work. Simply sending something with a stamp on it doesn't work. Mail gets lost. Uh, the IRS mailroom is, if you can imagine, it's, not not a lab. You know what I mean? Mail's lost, mail gets destroyed. It happens, and so the only proof you have is that certified return receipt. Make sure you always mail everything to the IRS with a certified return receipt. All right, next one, best interest of the taxpayer. This one I'm not really sure about, honestly. I'm curious to see what it says. TAS acceptance of these cases will help ensure that taxpayers receive fair and equitable treatment and that their rights as taxpayers are protected. Okay, so, maybe this comes down to taxpayer rights. And I think I've discussed taxpayer rights before. Taxpayer rights are fairly straightforward. It is that you have the right to know, you have the right to understand, you have a right to due process, you have the right to not pay more than what you owe, and you have the right to have a hearing or some sort of trial about whatever your issue or tax case may be. And you have a right to privacy, but you know, public policy. Again, this is something that's not going to be used very often. I definitely don't suggest going this route. Public policy has to do with how your particular tax situation is being treated and how that can affect others. Okay. On this IRM, there's a bunch of examples and stuff like that. So if you want to know more, definitely go out this. It'll give you like a lot more information in detail. But what I gave you is pretty much what you need, like I said, to get your case heard. And again, my advice to you is to go the route of a systemic issue or a systemic burden, right? Whereas the IRS has just not gotten back to you in the allotted time. There's a couple other things I want to touch on, and then we'll go over the form. Here we go. All right, exceptions to the taxpayer advocacy service criteria. All right, so these are exceptions. These are cases they will take even if we discussed above. And this is, again, goes back to how and why they would just outright, deny a case too. Okay. So first thing is the taxpayer's complaint or inquiry only questions the constitutionality of the tax system. This is something that's been going on for decades. The IRS talks about it every year. It's something that I get asked about by clients, and it's the same answer every time. And I would love to give that answer here publicly. Taxes are voluntary, period. End of story. They're voluntary. However, please understand that the U.S. government is an occupying force, point blank, period. And they occupy with guns, violence. That's just the way it works. Why do you have to pay taxes? Because if you don't, people with guns will show up to your house and force you to pay. It's just that simple. If you have a problem with that, then that means you have a problem with the occupying force. Your only choice is to leave or to somehow subvert the government. There are no options. Let's not play around here. Again, it's an occupying force. They took this country by force, and they control it by force, with violence, with guns. Anything they ask you to do, I don't care what it is, a gun is going to back it up. There's no such thing as rights. There's just no such thing as that. You don't have a right to anything. If I put a gun to your head and tell you to do something, you're either going to do it or you're going to die. That's just the way it works. That's life. That's anywhere you go in the world. If you have a question about that, go back and look at how they did the Japanese in the 40s during World War II. They were U.S. citizens. Didn't matter, right? So taxes work the same way. You pay it simply because you have to. Now, I've talked a lot about ways to pay less. I've talked about ways to pay only what you owe, right? And again, please understand, it is voluntary. You don't have to report anything. You don't have to pay anything. And you always have the option of leaving the country before they take your passport. And depending on what country you go to, there's extradition laws that will keep the U.S. from grabbing you in that country. All right, so we're done with that. So that's the constitutionality thing. Same thing goes with the increase solely involves frivolous tax strategies intended to avoid or delay the filing. Again, it goes back to the same thing. And we all know what those are. No need to really go into it. But let's talk about what gets your accept no matter what, right? So if you are part of a refund integrity verification operation that started after March 5 of 2021, you can go to your congressional office, and the congressional office can send a form 911 that we'll go over here in just a second, and taxpayer advocacy will definitely take your case no matter what. Okay. The next one is the offset bypass refund. This is only dealing with businesses who may have issues with their EIN numbers, and sometimes fraud gets put into this category as well. If that is you, then the Taxpayer Advocacy Service will accept your case no matter what. But again, you definitely want to understand that you are part of this offset bypass refund issue before going to Taxpayer Advocacy Service, so that you can properly report, what's going on and why you need their help. And the next one is returns involved before 2020. So these are old tax returns that for whatever reason have not been resolved with the IRS, and these returns had to be filed before this year. Okay, and so that's going to be something like I don't know. I had an amendment that I filed for 2017, and I filed it in 2021, and that return has not been processed. I can then go to Taxpayer Advocacy Service to have that issue resolved. All right. Look at the form. All right. So it's going to be pretty straightforward. Um, if your spouse is not part of this issue, do not include your spouse in this issue. Okay. Only if it's a joint return and the issue is concerning both of your joint returns will you include your spouse. Please do not include your spouse if this issue does not include your spouse. Okay. All right. Current address. You will use your current mailing address, not necessarily your tax address or address on your last return. You will use your current address just in case something needs to be mailed to you. All right. Email address is good, even though I've never ever received anything in my email from Taxpayer Advocacy. They do ask for it, so maybe that it works. I've just never seen it work. Tax form, again, if this is a personal return, it's going to be 1040. If this is business, then it'll be 1120 or 1065 or whatever you may have. But 1040 is going to be typical, again, if this is an individual. You'll definitely want to make sure that you enter the tax years. This isn't that important, but it is a good idea to use tax years prior to the current tax year. So currently we're in tax year 2021, even though it's 2022. Okay, we're in tax year 2021, even though the date is 2022. So if you're filling out one of these 911 forms, you want to use a tax year prior to the current tax year. So you would use tax year 2020. All right. Putting tax year 2021 in January of 2022 is an easy way for your stuff to just not get looked at, because how can you have an issue that's current, right? Like I said, unless enough time has passed, right? Because taxpayer advocacy is going to say you have to give the IRS time to resolve an issue. You can't just have a problem with the IRS, right? You have to give them time to resolve it. If they haven't resolved it, then you can come to taxpayer advocacy. Um, Taxpayer advocacy will call you. That's how they will contact you. So be sure to include your phone number as well as the best time to call. I always check this box to consent to them leaving a voicemail, because if you don't, then they will call you. If you don't answer, they will just hang up. So you definitely want to make sure to include that. And then the tax issue, please describe. Again, this is where I suggest that you go back to the link that I have here for you, and you use the verbiage that is in this particular manual. And this is something, like I said, that they are familiar with, something that they have studied and trained on. And so when they see the verbiage here, they will know exactly what it means and what's going on. I would simply just copy and paste systemic burden and then one of these criteria, right? After you have that information pasted in here, then you want to talk about maybe, I was told 30 days. I haven't heard anything back in 30 days. And then as far as the relief and assistance you're requesting, it is almost always best to simply say to resolve and close this case, period. Don't get cute. Don't go into detail. Don't use a lot of words. No one wants to read that stuff. Okay? Keep it short. Keep it sweet. I want to resolve this case and close this case. If it's a refund that you're due, say I want to resolve this case and close this case, meaning I want my refund. Okay? You don't need to talk about a refund necessarily, especially because, like I said, once they have your information, your name, your social, and they know the tax years this is involving, they can go and look all that stuff up. They don't really need you to tell them anything about it, because they can just do their own research. No different than if a client comes to me and says, hey, I have a problem with the IRS. The first thing they want to do is go into this long, drawn out story. And honestly, I don't want to hear it. I'm just like, listen, just give me your information. I what's going on, right? And that's how you want it. Of course, in 3, you're not going to fill out. This is for that taxpayer advocacy person to fill out, okay? And I think looking at this kind of gives you a really good idea of what they're looking for and how they process these things, okay? When they receive these, they have to fill out this third part if you are going to have a tax advocacy order fulfilled, okay? It simply says, it's basically what the person is experiencing and what we need to do to try and resolve this issue. All right. Let's make sure. Sign, publications, IRS employee. That's it. Again, I'll put these links in the description. And another thing too, there are tax advocacy service offices. My advice to you is to fax in this form. It's the fastest way, it's the easiest way, and you will typically get something back within 24 to 40 hours, as long as, again, it isn't something frivolous or it isn't something very recent, okay? As long as it's, everything that I discussed before, you should get a call back in 24 to 48 hours if you fax. If you mail, it's going to take a long time. If you go to the office, depending on how busy that office is, it's going to take a long time. And it's a lot harder to sometimes get your issue seriously considered if you go into an office as well. Just because when it's on paper, it's very straightforward, it's very pointed, right? And then they can do their research and then get to you and then come up with a resolution. Versus going into the office, a lot of times it's a conversation. And we're humans. Humans like to judge, right? And based on who you are, what you look like, they'll judge you, and they'll take your case or not take your case based on that, and that's unfortunate. So facts if you can.